Okay, so in the following lessons, we're going to look at what's the chapter on the habitat study. And in this area, we introduce this new idea of what's called ecology. So ecology. So we want to think about what is this word ecology? What does it mean? So a way to think about it is it's a branch of biology. So So it's a branch of biology. And if we think about biology is the study of life. And in relation to ecology, so it studies the branch of biology that studies the relationships of organisms to one another and to their physical environment. So this is like when we think about this word ecology. So there's an awful lot going on in ecology. So it's a branch of biology and it studies the relationship of organisms to one another and to their physical environment. So you have organisms and they relate to each other in a particular way. So you might have, for example, prey and predators. Those organisms live in a physical environment, and it's how all of those relationships, what happens in those relationships, and the study and the kind of view and documentation of those relationships. If we think about like why this is important, so why bother studying this? Like why bother studying this? Studying organisms and the relationship to each other and the environment. It's very important because it provides knowledge about the way the Earth works. So if we think about, for example, global warming, for example, that's something um, that scientists study, and they look at how global warming is impacting on organisms, let's say within the environment, and including us as well. So it gives us that knowledge about the way the Earth works. It provides evidence as well of the interdependence between the natural world and people as well. So it shows the relationship between ourselves as humans and our relationship with the rest of the world. Like one important relationship is the fact that organisms such as plants, that green plants, they provide the oxygen that we breathe. So there's that relationship that we can understand when we study this branch of biology. It gives a better understanding of the ecological systems, will allow scientists to predict the consequences of human activity on the environment. So again, if we have a better understanding of how these relationships work, we can better understand our impact on the earth and on those relationships as well. So for example, when we pollute or if we produce too much CO2, for example, what impact that has, and we can actually look at that and see what happens. And it gives people a systematic way to monitor the effects of industrial development on local habitats. So if we think about, there's certain animals that live in the Amazon, for example, and they rely on the trees and the environment that's there in order for them to survive. And when that land is cleared away to make room, for example, for the development of industry, what happens is that destroys that habitat. So this whole study of ecology gives us a relationship, gives us a view into, how are we impacting on, how is the modernization of the world and industrialization, how is that impacting on nature? us then to this important idea. So we have these things called habitats. So and a habitat, it's the natural environment where a particular organism lives. So it's the natural. Where a particular. So it's where it's the natural environment where a particular organism lives. So if we look at this example here, like in this image here, so we have different habitats. So if we have a look, so these guys, so for example, the rabbit, the worm, and the plant, these are the organisms or the living systems. And we can see then that, each of these guys, they have a particular space where they like to live. So for example, rabbits have their burrows, plants need soil and they need light from the sun, earthworms need to live in the soil, spiders have their webs, and birds have their nests and they have their environment as well. So a way to kind of think about it is that every organism has a unique habitat that provides for its needs. So for example, these organisms live in these habitats because the habitats provide for their needs. And this is where they get their food, water, and shelter. So for example, each of these organisms, they need food in order to survive. They need shelter from the elements, and they need water then as well in order to be able to survive. They can also breed in their natural habitat as well. So in their natural habitat, they come into contact with other similar organisms that are part of their species, and they're able to breed and reproduce in the environment. And the climate of the habitat, the food available in the habitat, and competition from other species, these are some of the factors that determine whether a species will survive or not. So in order for so for example, if we take a spider, in order for it to survive in its particular habitat where it lives, it needs a readily availability of flies, for example, or insects that it can trap in its web and get its food source. If there's competition from other organisms in that environment, if the competition is too severe and for example, if birds are coming along and eating them, they're not going to survive. And if the conditions, or for example, if it gets too cold or too hot, these conditions may not then be suitable for this organism in order for it to survive in that habitat. So some of the things then to think about. So for example, the habitat, it provides food, water, and shelter. So it provides food, water, and shelter. It allows organisms to breed. And so these are some of the things that, like, a habitat provides for an organism. So it gives them food, water, and shelter, and allows the organisms to breed. And the conditions have to be right in the habitat in order for the organism to be able to live there. If it gets too hot or if there's too much competition, these are things that can adversely impact on the organism. Now also as well, so we have all of these individual organisms. Now they don't live in isolation. So normally what they do is they live in what's called a community. So a community. So what is a community? So it's all the animals. So it's all the animals and plants that live in a particular area. Which and this area is what we call habitat. And share the resources of that area. So this idea of a community. So a community is all the animals and plants that live in a particular area or habitat, and they share the resources of that area. So like a really like simple example of a community would be if we think about a town or a village. So we have all the people that live in the town or a village, and they are sharing that particular area or that habitat, and they're also sharing all the resources in that area as well. So animals live in communities as well, and they have to share resources with each other also. And that's what we mean. So this term, this idea of community in relation to ecology, that's what it means. So here, for example, this is an example of what we mean by a community. So if we just have a look at this. So an ecological community is a group of interacting species living in the same place. So for example, like we have all of these organisms and they're all living within this, they're all living as a community. Now we can see here that, certain organisms they eat other organisms and they live off those organisms. So a community is bound together by the effects that species have on one another. So if we think about here, for example, so we have birds and they are prey for example, owls. And then those owls can be prey then for higher animals such as hawks. The same thing here as well. So for example, we have hedgehogs and rabbits and they're going to live off like the insects and the grass and the different resources that are supplied, let's say, within its habitat. But then the fox then is going to like eat, for example, the hedgehog or the rabbit, and it's going to live off those organisms. So there'll be this kind of a cycle. So again, the habitat will keep this cycle going. So it's an interaction between all of these animals. So a community is bound together by the effects that species have on one another. Within a community, organisms all have a unique niche or a role they fill to keep the community healthy. So, for example, the insects they will provide food for the bird. For example, the grass, for example, will provide food for a rabbit. The rabbit provides food for the fox, and so on and so forth. And this is this relationship between all of these organisms and these organisms with each other and within their habitat. This is again what we call a community. So then we have this idea, and I just kind of introduced it. It's this idea of what's called a niche. So a niche. So we have what's called the ecological niche. So the ecological niche of a species it's its role in a community. So is its role in a community. And how it fits in. And how it interacts with other organisms. So this is what's known as its ecological niche. So again, the ecological niche of a species is its role in a community and how it fits in and how it interacts with other organisms. So this is like the niche. This is like how the particular organism fits into its community, and how like its role that it plays within that community. And just an example of what we mean by that in relation to an ecological niche. So this here, for example, this is a community. These individual organisms, they relate to each other in a particular way, and they form part of this community. Now, if we have a look and think about, let's say, when we talk about these niches, so for example, herons live near fresh water and nest high in mature trees, and they feed on fish. So that's like their ecological niche, if you like. So it's its role in the community and how it fits in and how it interacts with other organisms. So its role in the community is that it lives near fresh water. It nests high, for example, in mature trees, and they feed on fish. So that's how they're interacting and like surviving, let's say, within their community. If you think the fish, then, for example, it, like freshwater fish, it lives within the freshwater, and it provides food, for example, for the herd. So that is its like ecological niche. If you take these guys, so ducks or mallards are found in almost any freshwater habitat, and they feed on plants and animals on or just below the surface of the water, and they will also feed in suitable fields away from the water as well. So again, this is another organism. This is its habitat that it survives in, and it interacts in a particular way in that habitat. It does unique things that are unique to it, or unique to its particular niche, if you like. So these guys here, aphrodisiacs, they feed on insects, small marine invertebrates, and seeds by swiping their bills from side to side in the shallow water. So they can kind of move along, and they move back and forth like this, and they kind of filter the water, and they eat, for example, invertebrates. These guys, oyster catchers, use their knife-like beaks to open bivalve shells and search the sand for worms and crabs as well. So again, this is an organism, this is its habitat, it's living as part of a community, and it has a particular job, let's say, within the community. And these guys here then, so they hunt for insects and small invertebrates on the beach and in grasslands as well. So again, so the ecological niche of a species is its role in the community and how it fits in and how it interacts with other organisms as well. So again, this just gives like an example of like this idea of a niche, and then this idea of some of the terms that we've looked at. So we've talked about a habitat. So habitat is where an organism lives, and that habitat provides for the needs of the organism, provides shelter, food, and it allows it to breed with its own species as well. The organisms live within a community like this, for example, and a community is all the animals and plants that live in a particular area or habitat and share the resources in that area. And then we have this idea of an ecological niche. Just really just a quick introduction to just the habitat study and just some of the terms that you need to know and that you need to learn. So you need to know like what ecology is, for example. So it's a branch of biology that studies the relationship of organisms to one another and to their physical environment. You have, for example, a habitat is a natural environment where a particular organism lives. It provides food, water, and shelter, and allows the organism to breed. So it's a place where it can meet up with its other like species, for example, that it can breed with. A community then is all the animals and plants that live in a particular area or habitat and share the resources of that area. So that's what we mean by a community. And then within that community, each of the organisms has a particular niche. So the ecological niche of a species is its role in a community and how it fits in and how it interacts with other organisms as well. So again, we will continue on and we look at, like for example, studying a habitat. Why bother studying a habitat, and what are some of the tools, for example, that ecologists can use when they want to like study and look at a particular habitat. Okay, so thank you for listening.